The cabin buzzed with the restless energy of boarding passengers, a mix of rolling suitcases thudding against the carpet and the muffled chatter of voices. Naomi shifted her baby against her chest, patting her daughter's back as the infant squirmed, tiny fists pressing against her blouse. She whispered softly, rocking slightly in her seat, trying to coax her child into calmness before the plane filled to capacity. The baby's warm weight against her chest gave her strength, but she could feel the exhaustion pooling in her bones after a long day of travel. Still, Naomi held her head high, her dignity intact, her presence graceful despite the fatigue. She reached down for the bottle tucked into the side pocket of her diaper bag, careful not to disturb the baby too much. The bag was stuffed with every necessity she could think of: diapers, wipes, formula, toys. But in that moment she only needed one thing: a little milk to stop the fussing before it grew into a wail. As she fumbled with the cap, a shadow loomed over her. "Ma'am!" came a voice sharp as broken glass. Naomi looked up. A flight attendant, tall with sleek blonde hair pulled into a severe bun, stared down at her. The woman's expression carried no warmth, only irritation. "You need to keep that baby quiet." Naomi blinked, startled. "I'm trying," she said softly, keeping her tone polite. "She's just fussy right now, but she'll settle down once we're in the air." The attendant leaned in, her voice rising just enough for nearby passengers to catch every word. "Passengers pay for comfort. If you can't control your child, maybe you shouldn't be flying at all." Gasps traveled through the row ahead. A middle-aged woman in the next seat glanced over with wide eyes but quickly turned her head, pretending to scroll through her phone. Naomi felt heat flush her cheeks, humiliation searing like fire under her skin. She opened her mouth to respond, but the baby whimpered, fussing louder now at the tension in the air. Naomi tried to ignore the sting of the words. She adjusted the baby, kissed the soft curls at the top of her daughter's head, and reached again for the bottle. But before she could secure the nipple into the baby's mouth, the flight attendant reached down swiftly and slapped Naomi's hand. The sharp crack echoed louder than it should have, the impact jolting Naomi's knuckles and startling the baby into a loud, piercing cry. The entire cabin froze. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The sound of the infant's wails filled the silence, each shriek bouncing off the cabin walls. Naomi's hands trembled as she pulled her baby close, heart hammering in her chest. The sting from the slap burned, but worse was the wave of shame that swept over her. She couldn't believe what had just happened, not here, not in public, not in front of so many eyes. Passengers whispered furiously now. A man 2 rows back muttered, "Did she just hit her?" Another woman covered her mouth, her phone trembling as she pretended to scroll but kept the camera angled toward the confrontation. Naomi looked up at the attendant, her voice breaking. "Why would you? She's just a baby." The attendant's jaw tightened. "If you can't manage her, maybe you should have stayed home." Naomi's chest ached. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but her baby was sobbing uncontrollably, and every ounce of her energy went into rocking her, whispering, trying to soothe the cries that seemed to grow louder the more tense the air became. Her hand trembled as she finally secured the bottle into her daughter's mouth. The baby latched hungrily, her cries softening into hiccups. Naomi exhaled shakily, fighting tears. The sting of the slap was nothing compared to the sting of humiliation, the cruel reminder that no matter how much grace she carried, some people would only see her skin and her struggle and decide she deserved less. But then, from the aisle seat, the rustle of paper broke through the whispers. A man who had been reading the newspaper slowly lowered it. He had sat quietly throughout the exchange, his presence unassuming, but now his gray eyes fixed sharply on the flight attendant. His movements were deliberate as he folded the paper, placed it neatly on his lap, and lifted his gaze. Naomi felt his hand rest on her arm. Steady. Calm. The kind of touch that said, "I'm here. I saw everything, *." The attendant stiffened under his stare, her earlier confidence flickering. Passengers leaned in, sensing something was about to shift. The baby, still hiccuping softly, nestled against Naomi's chest, unaware of the storm brewing just above her. The man's lips curved into the faintest smile, but it wasn't warm. It was sharp, dangerous, a promise of reckoning. He hadn't spoken yet, but the weight of his presence shifted the air in the cabin. Even the hum of the engine seemed to fade, every eye locked on him as if the balance of the entire flight rested on the words he was about to say. Naomi tightened her hold on her child, heart racing with both fear and a strange flicker of hope. Whatever came next, she knew she was no longer standing alone. The silence was electric, every second stretching longer than the last, and when the man finally opened his mouth, the cabin braced for impact. "Did you just hit my wife?" The words landed in the cabin like a blade drawn from its sheath, soft but sharp enough to cut through every murmur, every shuffle of movement. Passengers who had been pretending not to stare turned fully now, eyes wide, phones subtly angled toward the confrontation. Naomi froze, her daughter still pressed against her chest, the tiny infant nursing on the bottle as though unaware of the firestorm around her. The flight attendant straightened, smoothing the front of her uniform with shaking hands. Her lips parted, her voice forced calm but trembling around the edges. "Sir, she was disrupting the passengers. I was simply doing my duty." "Answer the question." The man's voice did not rise in volume, but the authority in it pressed down like a weight on everyone who heard. The woman's throat bobbed as she swallowed. "I handled the situation as I thought necessary." "You handled the situation," he repeated slowly, as though tasting the words. "By raising your hand to a woman holding her child?" Gasps rippled again through the surrounding rows. A man across the aisle muttered, "Unbelievable." A younger passenger whispered, "I got that on video." Naomi's cheeks burned again, but not with shame this time. Her husband's tone had shifted the balance. Another attendant hurried down the aisle, her expression nervous, eyes darting between the tense faces. "Sir, please," she said quickly, "let's not escalate things. We'll find a way to resolve this." But before she could finish, the first attendant snapped, anger boiling through her veneer of professionalism. "He should be thanking me. People like her need to be reminded of their place." The air sucked out of the cabin. Every conversation died. Even the baby paused, releasing the bottle with a small hiccup, as though sensing the eruption that had just been set off. Naomi's husband tilted his head slowly, his expression unreadable but his jaw tight. His voice dropped lower, carrying even more danger. "Her place?" The attendant faltered, eyes darting around for support, but pride, and prejudice, wouldn't let her back down. "Yes. I represent this airline, and she should know we don't tolerate." "You represent this airline," he interrupted, his words measured. He leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. Interesting choice of words. He paused long enough that even the second attendant shifted uneasily on her feet. "Because I own this airline." The silence was deafening. For a moment, the entire plane seemed to hold its breath. Then, a low wave of whispers surged like a current. "He owns it? Did he say own? Oh my God!" The first attendant's confidence drained instantly, color flooding from her face until she looked pale under the harsh cabin lights. The second attendant blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Naomi's eyes widened, lips parting, her shock plain. Even she hadn't expected him to reveal it like this. The man's tone didn't waver as he leaned slightly forward, his presence filling the narrow space between the rows. "And you just laid hands on the mother of my child." Passengers erupted in a mix of gasps and low murmurs. Several phones lifted higher now, no longer hiding their recordings. A teenager leaned toward his mother, whispering, "This is going viral." The mother hushed him, eyes still locked on the scene. The captain's voice crackled nervously over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our final safety checks before takeoff, so please." His words were drowned out by the tension, ignored as every gaze stayed glued on the drama unfolding. The first attendant staggered back a step, her throat tight as she tried to recover. Sir, I didn't mean." "Don't call me sir," he cut in, his voice like ice. "Call me what every employee calls me. Mr. Lawson." Recognition sparked immediately in a few faces. Someone whispered, Lawson? That Lawson? The CEO? The murmurs spread quickly through the cabin, passengers nodding, murmuring, realizing they weren't just watching an angry husband but a man whose name graced financial magazines and boardroom reports. Naomi's breath caught. Even though she had known, even though she had married him knowing exactly who he was, there was something unreal about watching him drop the mask in front of so many strangers, his power revealed in the most ordinary of places, a plain aisle. The attendant tried to gather herself, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. I only meant. What you meant, he said coldly, was that you believed you had authority to humiliate her. To slap her hand. To insult her in front of an entire cabin. He gestured to the passengers around them, who nodded and murmured their agreement. What you meant was that you thought no one would hold you accountable. The second attendant tried again, voice trembling. Mr. Lawson, please, maybe we can resolve this privately. But the first one, desperate, clung to the last shred of arrogance. I represent the airline. I was protecting the comfort of the passengers. That broke something loose. A passenger from the back called out. Protecting us? She was just feeding her baby. Another chimed in. You slapped her hand, we all saw it. A third, phone still recording, said firmly. It's on video. Don't even try to spin it. Mr. Lawson tilted his head, listening, then nodded slowly. His voice carried calmly but with finality. It seems the passengers disagree. The first attendant's mouth opened, but no words came. Her eyes darted from phone to phone, from Naomi's tear-streaked face to Lawson's piercing gaze. She looked small now, her earlier cruelty shrinking in the harsh light of truth. Naomi felt her husband's hand rest on hers again. Steady grounding? She blinked back tears, her voice quiet but certain when she whispered. She hit me in front of everyone. And everyone saw. He replied softly, but his eyes never left the attendant. The baby, soothed now, gurgled faintly, almost like a small laugh, and several passengers chuckled nervously, the tension snapping but not dissolving. The storm hadn't passed. It was only building towards something bigger. The captain himself appeared now, moving down the aisle quickly, his cap in hand, his face damp with nervous sweat. He stopped just short of Lawson. Mr. Lawson, I wasn't aware, please, if we could just. His voice trailed off under the weight of Lawson's unflinching stare. Naomi leaned against her husband's shoulder, heart racing. The humiliation still burned, but a strange sense of vindication had begun to rise, fueled by the voices around her, by the way the truth refused to be buried. Mr. Lawson finally spoke again, voice low but sharp as glass. You say you represent this airline. His eyes narrowed. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life. The passengers buzzed again, recording, whispering, caught between outrage and awe. The flight attendant looked like she might collapse under the weight of it. And then he stood slowly, his full height commanding the narrow aisle. His presence was magnetic, his authority absolute. The entire cabin leaned in, waiting. The attendant swallowed hard, realizing now that the man she had slapped indirectly wasn't just the husband of the woman she despised. He was her boss. Her employer. The owner of the airline itself. And in his eyes there was no forgiveness. Only judgment. The arrogant mask that had carried her through the confrontation shattered like glass beneath a hammer. Her lips trembled as she tried to piece together some excuse, some desperate line that might undo what had already been said in front of dozens of witnesses and dozens more recording on their phones. Sir, Mr. Lawson, I didn't mean," she stammered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines and the buzz of murmurs rising again from the rows. But he lifted his hand, palm out, silencing her without raising his voice. His composure never cracked, though his eyes carried an intensity that made her shrink back involuntarily. "Do not call me sir," he said quietly, each word deliberate. "You will call me what every employee of this airline calls me. You will call me Mr. Lawson." The name struck like a spark in dry timber. A man across the aisle gasped, whispering fiercely to his seatmate. "Lawson. As in Lawson Air." Another passenger muttered. "He owns it. "Oh my God, he's the one!" The recognition spread like wildfire, whispers igniting down the length of the cabin until nearly everyone knew they weren't witnessing a simple dispute between passenger and crew. They were witnessing the owner of the airline himself confronting one of his employees. Naomi's breath caught. Even though she had always known who her husband was in the world outside their home, there was something breathtaking about watching him reveal that power here, in this narrow aisle, against someone who had dared to belittle her. The strength in his voice wasn't loud, but it filled every corner of the plane. The attendant faltered, her face pale, eyes darting from one recording phone to another. I didn't realize. I thought. What you thought," Lawson cut her off, his tone like ice, "was that you could humiliate her. That because she was a young mother, traveling alone with her child, that you could slap her hand and no one would care. That you could spit words like her place and no one would question you. That is what you thought." Naomi's chest ached at the truth of it, but she held her baby closer, kissed the top of her daughter's head, and let the moment unfold. Several passengers spoke up now, their courage buoyed by Lawson's steady authority. A woman a few rows back called, "I saw it all," she hit her hand clear as day. A man held up his phone. "I've got the whole thing recorded. You can see her slap." Another chimed in. "She insulted her, told her she should know her place. We all heard it." Lawson turned his gaze briefly toward them, his expression softening for just a heartbeat. "Thank you," he said, inclining his head. "I wanted that on record." The attendant shook her head violently, desperation rising like a tide. No, it wasn't like that, I swear it wasn't. I only meant to." He cut her off again, sharper now. "You only meant to assert control. To remind her, as you said, of her place. But let me tell you what you seem to have forgotten." He leaned forward slightly, his voice low but carrying. "The only place you have here is to serve passengers, to ensure their safety and comfort, not to raise your hand against them. And especially not against a mother holding her child." The cabin filled with murmurs of approval. Several passengers clapped lightly, unable to hold back their agreement. The sound sent the attendant stumbling further into panic. The captain appeared now, moving briskly down the aisle, his cap in hand and a sheen of nervous sweat on his forehead. "Mr. Lawson," he said quickly, "please, if we can resolve this situation quietly." Lawson turned his head, and the captain froze mid-sentence. There was nothing violent in his expression, no raised voice, but the sheer weight of his authority silenced even the pilot of the aircraft. He turned back to Naomi, his eyes softening. "Naomi," he said quietly enough that only she and the closest passengers could hear, "do you want me to handle this?" Her throat tightened. She looked down at her baby, who had finally quieted in her arms, then back at him. There was no hesitation, only the faint tremor of her voice as she whispered, "Yes." He gave a single nod, as though the final seal had been placed. His jaw set, his presence radiating judgment. The second attendant stepped forward now, wringing her hands. "Mr. Lawson, maybe this is all a misunderstanding, maybe if we just—" But he didn't look at her. His eyes stayed locked on the one who had dared to strike. "You've made your choices," he said, his voice like stone. "And choices carry consequences." The first attendant's knees seemed to buckle slightly. "Please, Mr. Lawson, I didn't know who she was, I didn't know." That snapped his patience. His voice sharpened, cutting her plea into ribbons. "You didn't need to know who she was. She is a passenger. She is a human being. That is all you ever needed to know." The words struck harder than any shout could. Naomi felt tears prick her eyes, not from the earlier humiliation but from the truth of his defense. Her husband wasn't just standing for her, he was standing for every time she had ever been dismissed, diminished, or made to feel invisible. The baby stirred slightly, pressing a small hand against Naomi's collarbone, but didn't cry. The silence in the cabin stretched, heavy and expectant. The attendant broke it with a choked sob. "Please, give me another chance. I'll do better, I swear." But Lawson only shook his head slowly. I don't deal in empty promises. Only in accountability. His eyes swept the cabin deliberately, noting every phone, every recording. And accountability is coming. Passengers exchanged glances, their eyes wide, the weight of the moment sinking in. Some shifted in their seats, caught between sympathy for the woman's desperation and the undeniable truth of her actions. But no one dared speak against him. Naomi's heart raced. She knew the storm was about to break fully. She tightened her grip on her baby, pressing her lips to the child's soft hair, whispering silently, "It's almost over." And then Lawson straightened to his full height, towering in the narrow aisle, his gaze locked once more on the trembling attendant. His voice was calm again, deadly calm. "You're done." The words rang like a verdict. The attendant shook her head wildly, panic written across her face. "No, please, Mr. Lawson, please don't." But he had already turned slightly toward the rest of the cabin, making sure they all heard the judgment that would follow. "This will not go unanswered." The murmur that rose was no longer shock. It was anticipation. The plane hadn't moved an inch, but every passenger knew they were caught in the middle of something far greater than a delay. They were witnessing a reckoning. And Naomi's husband, calm and unshaken, was the one holding the scales. "You're done." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, cutting through the tense hush of the cabin. There was no anger in his tone, no shouting, just a calm certainty that landed heavier than any raised voice ever could. Every passenger knew immediately what it meant. The attendant's career, her authority, her last shred of arrogance, gone in an instant. Her lips quivered, her eyes darting from Lawson's unflinching stare to the sea of faces watching, recording, bearing witness. "Why, you can't do that," she stammered, voice breaking. "You can't just—" "I can't," Lawson replied, each syllable sharp and final. "And I just did." His gaze shifted to the second attendant, who had hovered nervously the entire time. "Take her badge." The woman's hands shook as she reached toward her colleague, her fingers fumbling at the pin that marked her uniform. The disgraced attendant clutched it reflexively, her knuckles white, but Lawson's eyes bore into her, and slowly, trembling, she let it go. The small metal emblem came free with a click, and the second attendant handed it over like she was holding something radioactive. Lawson took it, his expression unreadable as he turned the badge over once in his palm, then closed his fist around it. A low ripple of applause began, hesitant at first, then stronger as more passengers joined in. Some clapped softly, others muttered their approval under their breath. A few outright cheered. "Good for him, that's justice, about time." The disgraced attendant shrank under the weight of it, her face pale and her breath shallow. "You will never work in aviation again," Lawson continued, his voice steady, resonating with a judgment that felt bigger than the cabin itself. "You laid hands on a passenger, on a mother holding her child. You insulted her in front of witnesses. You abused your authority. Consider this your last flight. You are grounded, permanently." The attendant's knees gave out slightly, and she grabbed the back of a nearby seat to keep from collapsing. Tears streaked down her face now, but no sympathy rose to meet her. Phones stayed up, recording every second, and passengers leaned forward, captivated. The captain, still hovering awkwardly a few feet away, tried to salvage dignity for his crew. "Mr. Lawson, we'll have her escorted off the plane immediately. Security is on their way." Almost as if on cue, two uniformed airport security officers arrived at the front of the cabin. The disgraced attendant's eyes widened in panic, but before she could speak, Lawson's voice rang out again, commanding even them. "Escort her off this plane. She is banned from Lawson Air effective immediately. She is not to step foot on another one of my flights ever." The officers nodded firmly, stepping down the aisle. One took her by the arm, firm but not cruel, guiding her toward the exit. She resisted weakly, looking around as though searching for one sympathetic face among the crowd. But every gaze that met hers was cold, condemning, or simply blank. She had no allies left. As she was led past, some passengers muttered under their breath. One man said, "Good riddance." Another woman shook her head. Imagine hitting a mother with a baby in her arms. A young girl whispered to her mother, "She's in big trouble." And the mother simply nodded. Phones followed her all the way down the aisle, recording her humiliation, her disgrace etched forever into the memory of that flight, and inevitably, into the internet that would devour the footage within hours. She disappeared past the door, flanked by security, her sobs muffled as the heavy door closed behind her. Silence filled the cabin for a moment, then Lawson turned back to the passengers. His expression softened, though the authority in his voice remained. "I want to apologize," he said clearly, his tone carrying over the rose. "No passenger should ever have to witness what just happened. No mother should ever be treated with such cruelty while caring for her child. That was not just an insult to my wife. It was an insult to every one of you who trusts this airline to treat you with dignity and respect." Applause broke out again, louder this time, unrestrained. Some passengers stood to clap, others whistled, the tension that had gripped them breaking into relief and vindication. Naomi blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the surge of support. Her husband turned to her then, his gaze soft, his hand reaching for hers. He sat down beside her again, the weight of his presence settling back into the quiet strength she had always known. "I told you," he murmured, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "I'll never let anyone hurt you." Naomi's throat tightened, her tears spilling over now, but they were not tears of humiliation anymore. They were tears of release, of vindication, of knowing that justice had been served not in private whispers but in front of everyone who had witnessed her pain. She looked down at their daughter, who had calmed again, her tiny hand resting against Naomi's collarbone. The baby gurgled softly, almost as if she sensed the shift in the air, as if she too knew they were safe. The applause still rippled through the cabin, passengers exchanging smiles and nods, phones tucked away now that the climax had passed. The captain cleared his throat over the intercom, his voice steadier this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be preparing for takeoff shortly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." But for the passengers, the real event of the flight had already happened. The rest would be routine, but they all knew they would leave this plane with a story that would echo far beyond the runway. They had seen arrogance meet justice. They had seen cruelty confronted by power and truth. Naomi leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, her eyes closing briefly as the exhaustion of the day settled over her. But beneath it was a new strength, a new certainty. She wasn't alone. She never would be. The engines roared louder, the plane beginning to roll toward the runway. Passengers whispered excitedly about what they had just witnessed. "That's going viral by tonight. She picked the wrong passenger. Imagine finding out you just slapped the boss's wife." Laughter, incredulous and cathartic, bubbled up here and there, easing the last of the tension. As the plane lifted into the air, Naomi looked out the small window, the clouds stretching endlessly into the horizon. She pressed her lips to her baby's soft head and whispered, "We're okay now." Her husband's hand remained clasped firmly around hers. His presence was solid, immovable, unshaken. He didn't need to say more. He had spoken enough, and his actions had spoken louder still. And somewhere above the clouds, with a mother holding her child tighter than ever, the world was reminded of a simple truth: respect is not optional. It is owed. This section is /1060 words. Do you want me to now polish all 4 parts into a seamless full story, around 4,000 plus words continuous, without breaks, so it reads like a cinematic narrative from start to finish?